Hi guys, this is my project on the first anti-abortion law. First, just what we're going to be talking about today, we have the table of contents. First, we're going to go over the timeline and background, historical context, cultural trends, the American history, the legacy, and then why this is all important. The first anti-abortion law in the United States was passed in 1828 in Connecticut. This law criminalized abortion after quickening, which was the point at which a woman could first feel fetal movement. Typically, this was around the 16th week of pregnancy. The law was part of a broader wave of legal and societal shifts during the early 19th century regarding reproductive rights and health, especially as medical practices and the understanding of pregnancy and fetal development were evolving. Next up, we have this historical timeline. This is just to show kind of what was happening in the U.S. around the time that this law was being passed. Next up, we have the historical context. There's a lot here, so I'm just going to go over some of it. First, we have medical understanding and practices, social and cultural context, legal and political landscape, and then quickening versus conception. First, in the early 19th century, abortion was not widely criminalized, and the practice was often carried out by midwives or other practitioners using herbal remedies or mechanical methods. However, the medical profession was undergoing changes, with physicians seeking to professionalize and establish dominance over other practitioners like midwives and lay healers. Quickening versus conception. This was a law in Connecticut that distinguished between abortions that have occurred before quickening and those that have occurred after. This distinction was important because the perception of life when began had significant legal and moral implications. Prior to quickening, an abortion was less likely to be considered a criminal act, partly due to medical ignorance and cultural beliefs about fetal development. This is a quote by James C. Moore in Abortion in America, The Origins and Evolution of National Policy. He says, early laws such as Connecticut's 1821 statute were aimed at unlicensed practitioners and midwives, reflecting the medical profession's desire to assert authority. I thought this was interesting because even back then, they were more worried about asserting dominance over women's bodies and their rights, which is crazy. Next up, we have cultural trends and forces. The 1828 anti-abortion law in Connecticut was shaped by a variety of cultural forces, including the professionalization of medicine, religious beliefs, gender norms, and the medical understanding of pregnancy. These forces collectively contributed to a legal framework that began regulating abortion in a way that reflected broader shifts in social attitudes towards women's roles, morality, and just the sanctity of life. This law was one of the first significant steps in a long history of legal restrictions on abortions in the United States. The American history. The 1828 law in Connecticut represents one of the first significant steps in the long history of abortion regulation in the United States. It reflects the growing influence of medical professionals, the impact of moral reform movements, and the changing attitudes towards women's roles in society, especially their roles as mothers. The law helped set the stage for increasing regulation of abortion throughout the 19th century. The contributed to the broader history of how abortion laws would develop and evolve in the U.S. In the 20th century, this history would become a significant event in the fight for women's reproductive rights, ultimately leading to more lenient policies established by Roe v. Wade in 1973, which marked a temporary shift in the balance between state power and individual reproductive rights. However, as the recent changes to Roe show, abortion remains a contentious and evolving issue in America in the legal and the cultural history. This is just a legacy. This legacy lives on as women today continue to fight to control our reproductive rights. What began as a law to regulate abortions has evolved into centuries-long struggles, with modern movements still pushing back against state restrictions and advocating for safe, legal access to abortion care even today. Why this is important. This is also a lot, but basically just in conclusion, this is so important for all young children to learn, just to have a more informed society, but more specifically young women need to be informed of this because it directly affects their lives, their rights, and their futures. Understanding how laws like this lay the foundation for controlling women's bodies helps young women see that their freedoms weren't always guaranteed and they still aren't. Learning this empowers them to make informed decisions, recognize their bodies, and advocate for their rights. Thank you. And then this is just my reference page right here.